Hello. Talk a little bit about the Vesica. A couple of videos got blocked because of music, so I'm going to edit and chop and put them together. Good time to have a look at the Vesica and how it applies to what might be called harmonics, and especially through architecture, but metrology, especially in regards to geometry, music, arithmetic, and astronomy, the Quadrivium, and how so much of this can be extracted from this very simple geometry, and that begins with the Vesica. Now again, the term sacred geometry is sort of taken off. If you don't like the word sacred, you can call it symbolic or whatever you want. Again, that word is a bit divisive for some. It implies many things that some might not be comfortable with, but when it comes down to it, it's got to do with Euclidean geometry. And so we're going to talk straight edge geometry. This is a ruler, it has marks on it, therefore it's a marked edge. As long as you're not using the marks on the straight edge, it counts as compass and straight edge geometry. And so the Vesica itself is very, very powerful in arithmetic and geometry, and it also points to music theory and some very interesting connections in regards to architecture, astronomy, and metrology systems of measurement. So we begin with a circle. I've done a construction line just to help us out. I think this is important to include these, but you don't have to draw the Vesica, because you draw a circle and then the center of the second circle is on the edge of the first. And so there we have the Vesica Piscis, Vesica Pisces, vessel of the fish. The hourglass is another term for it. And important fact is that it's at a 2:3 ratio. So it's defined by the setting of the compass 1, 2, and 3. So 3 wide or high, depending on how you orientate it. And it's also 2 high. So 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3. To begin with, this is important in music theory, the perfect fifth, 2/3, but it also applies to architecture, and whether it's Caffrey's pyramid, as in temple design, through to modern temple design, such as Manitoba Legislative Building, which is at a 2:3 ratio. The perfect fifth is also called the Hermetic constant, so that's at this 2:3 ratio, which is again so important in music. But also here in Australia, for instance, Governor Lachlan Macquarie, conscientious Freemason, very much into this as well. The street plans are designed on this 2:3 ratio, and we'll just draw a rectangle now. And so without changing the compass setting, so as you can see, it's still the same. There, using that construction line, just draw an arc. Do the same on the bottom there. On the other side, just repeat. And then we repeat that again. And now we're going to draw another construction line. And if you're drawing, like, one of the easier ways to do it is to put your pencil, your pen, on that point. So I'm going to draw a line straight down the middle there. And if I put my pencil there, then I can bring my ruler in, and just to make it a little bit easier. And so with that, now I want to put my point in the middle, and I'm going to set the compass to effectively 1.5, because it's 3 wide, and so we want half of that. Okay, so we've set the compass, and oops, I've missed a stage, so I'm going to bring the compass back to the original setting. Okay, and now we have this middle point, so where those two lines intersect. Draw an arc and another piece of the arc there. Now we set the compass to 1.5. Okay, so where this line passes through that section of arc, we do the same on the other side, and again at the top. And this is just to create the rectangle. The proportion of 2:3 is of course still there, but just as a drawing technique. And because this is also, like, this 2:3 rectangle is a template for ancient temples, for modern temples, also for street plans as well. And again, of course, we'll connect this to already music. but also to the Quadrivium in regards to astronomy especially, and through metrology. So now we have a 2 to 3 rectangle. But another important feature so we have this 2 to 3, and this has also to do with the harmonic numbers chart, which is built on 2s and 3s as well. Those numbers then build up and create some very important numbers, which are just repeated in ancient architecture, ancient symbolism, through to modern weights and ancient weights and measures, modern weights and measures, modern temples. But an important one as well is what we have is a rhombus. So we have these 4 points of the Vesica. If we bring them together, and we create a rhombus. And really what it is 2 equilateral triangles stacked on top of one another. And that in itself will lead us to, well, the hexagon, if you were to extend this out into the seed of life, as it's called. Again, that's for some that can be implies some other stuff, but that's just the name that's taken off. And because we know, if the setting of the compass, we know that the radius is 1. If we define that as 1, we know that this is of equal length as well, because that's from the center to the edge of the circle. So we know that this is 1, this is 1, that is 1. So what we have is 2 equilateral triangles stacked on top of one another. What's cool about that is because, so we know an equilateral triangle would be 60 degrees, and so 60 degrees, each degree is made up of 60 minutes, each minute is made up of 60 seconds, so 60 degrees would be 3,600 minutes, and then that would be 2,100, and that's minutes and seconds. And therefore we because if that's 60, therefore we know the rest of it would be 300. So it'd be 300 degrees. 300 degrees is 18,000 minutes, or 1,080,000 seconds. So we already get 216 and 108. These are, as we'll see, very important, very cool numbers as well. But also, so therefore we know that this would also create a hexagon angle, and therefore that has to be 120 degrees. 120 degrees is 7, I got that right. Or is it 72,000? No, I think that's okay. And in minutes and then in seconds, that would be 43,200 seconds of the compass. Another interesting point, this would create a hexagon, the angle of a hexagon here. And what's very cool about the hexagon, so many cool things about it, but the interior angle, let's call it there, I'm not sure what the specific name of that would be, 120. Therefore, 120 minus 360 would give us 240 degrees. So it's at a 1:2 ratio. This is again in these, that only happens here on the hexagon. Just so many cool things that emerge from there, and from, so 240 degrees would be 14,400. Am I missing a 0 there? I don't think so. And therefore that would be 86,400 seconds. So we have 108, 216, 432, and 864. Now even 144, 72, 18 and 36. So, okay, 108 times 2 is 216, times 2, 432, times 2, 864. And so if you were to do the same, so 18,000, so we just 18, 36, 18 times 2 is 36, 72, 36 times 2 is 72, and 72. Each one of these is very cool, very specific, but just for this video, I'm just going to be focusing on these four numbers here and how they apply especially to, well, Sun, Earth, and the Moon. And of course, all of this is built into the whether it's cathedrals, major public buildings, street plans, ancient temples, ancient proportions. It really is a carry-on. Again, all this stuff can be measured and tested. Not to poo-poo on some other stuff as well, but it seems to be that there's a lot of speculation without data, without data, and at least in my opinion, because you can attach anything to it if it becomes a system of belief rather than a system of metrology. Or the quadrivium. What is the quadrivium? We have geometry, music, arithmetic, and astronomy. And these are all aspects which have strong connections to weights and measure. And again, I just have to keep repeating it, that weights and measure is the Hermetic tradition. Hermes or Thoth were the gods of weights and measure, they were the gods of science, they were gods of engineering, and the Vesica, all these aspects are directly connected to what these gods originally were depicted as. And so, yes, Hermeticism isn't probably not the best way to say, but it's ancient science. And the mystery schools, the Magi, what were they? They were, or as they call them, Magistars in the Middle Ages. They were the alchemists, they were the astronomers, they were the engineers, they were the architects. And so often, at the core of this engineering are these numbers and this geometry and themes of Sun, Earth and Moon. So you'll see the themes repeated, but these themes can actually sort of then be applied back to the building block of all of this being the Vesica. And so now we'll have a look at the video and why especially these numbers here, 108, 216, 432, 864, which are just doubling up. Now and we'll also be looking at 864 times 2 is 1728 times 2, and we get 3, 4, 5, 6, and if we times that by 2, we get 6, 9, 12. And again, these will all be 1728, 6912, these ones. Awesome knowledge connected in there and connected to weights and measures, metrology, Sun, Earth and Moon, ancient architecture up until modern architecture, ancient weights and measure systems up until modern weights and measure systems. For instance, 1080 screen resolution, 720 screen resolution, 1440 screen resolution. But this also goes back to the Greeks and Romans and earlier, and how their weight systems, so 108 grains, 432 grains, as in a grain of wheat or barley, define the ounce. And again, just throughout time, throughout each age, there's been a consistent carry through. And the only question really is when did the 360-degree compass be solidified? That will be argued back or forth. Some people would put it 2,000 years, a little bit earlier. Some will say no, it didn't really appear till about the year 1000 AD. Well, either way, that doesn't matter. What we look at, the modern Hermetic tradition, so especially from the 1400s onwards, that was definitely, they understood. They were using the same weights and measures, and they also had the 360-degree compass, the mile, the foot, even the meter, because the meter is not only a unit of length, it's a unit of time. The second pendulum, so even look back to the works of Marin Mersenne and others, they understood the pendulum in the second, and they understood the length of the pendulum was important in regards to your position north or south of the equator. But we can say without fear of correction that at least from 600 years ago that this was in existence. And what was happening 600 years ago, that we had not begun the Industrial Revolution, we had not begun any of this, and therefore we were still working on ancient principles, ancient technology, ancient methodologies. So for instance, the scientific method and a lot of things that we now, the basis of our more modern society. Well, 600 years ago, you might as well say 5,000 years ago, because there was really no difference. The technology, the knowledge, the systems for these were essentially the same. And so, okay, let's have a look at the video.
So these are what's often referred to as the harmonic numbers, the most harmonic numbers, and it's especially the first few columns are at the heart of this, and it contains quite a bit of very lovely connections. Now, so there we see, well, the harmonic numbers and Sun, Earth and Moon. But you might notice now in the top corner, these begin with the numbers 2 and 3. So on the left hand going down, 2 times 2 times 2, etc. And then 3 squared, then 3 cubed, well, 2 squared, except 2 to the third, 2 to the fourth. And then we move across the top row, we have 3 squared, 9, and then 3 cubed, 27, 3 to the fourth, 81, 3 to the fifth, 243. And we can see they begin with 2 and 3, which emerges here from the Vesica Pisces. So again, now with the harmonics chart, we see the breakdown of the degrees, minutes and seconds which define that rhombus within the Vesica, which itself will lead to the hexagon. Essentially, it's those two equilateral triangles there in the beginning. But we, like again pointed out in the start, the numbers 18 times 2 is 36, times 2 is 72, times 2 is 140, 144, that's highlighted in yellow. And in the next column over, like beginning with 27 times 2 is 54, times 2 is 108, they're highlighted in blue. And how all of these numbers also are embedded into the rhombus coming from the 360 degree protractor. Just like with the ruler or with a clock, this is a unit of weights and measures strongly connected to navigation as well. So there's just another example of these of a very limited set of numbers within this emerging from the 360 degrees, but how this will also connect to other elements. As an example, here we see the same numbers, but just with some of the connections. It's much more extensive in this, but for instance, in the middle at the bottom, we see 216,000 seconds. Well, how that number 216 miles diameter of the moon, mean diameter, 21,600 nautical miles the circumference of the Earth. And if you just, you could pause it and move around, but we get a beginning. Again, this is just a tip of the iceberg into how these numbers incorporate, especially Sun, Earth, and well, specifically Sun and Moon important measurements. But they would also connect to music theory, to of course geometry, and to and arithmetic. They're all quite amongst the Quadrivium. All these numbers are very, very lovely. Okay, so back to this chart, and I've going to correct some of I made a very silly arithmetic mistake. You do these things for 8 o'clock in the morning, that's what happens. But so here we see the chart, and I'm going to do a focus on 3 to the third, or 27. So here we see 27 times 2 is 54, times 2 is 108, times 2 is 216, times 2 is 432, 864, 1728, etc. And we'll begin with the number 108. And I've done some other videos on this. It's really just like a huge list. You could go on quite some bit, connecting all these apparently separate unconnected cultures, all have this focus on 108. And so both as a Sun, Earth and Moon number, it's very important. Here I have the diameter on the long scale at 108. The radius of the Moon, the mean radius, would be 1,080 miles in the modern speak, but Just as an intro, we see it so in astronomy, it's in geometry, it's in built into ancient legends such as the New Jerusalem, the Ark of Utnapishtim, which is the oldest recorded flood story written down, not oral tradition. Built into the weights and measures. For instance, 1 yard is 108 barleycorn, and it's just been embedded through time cross cultures in these measure systems. 108 degrees in the Pentagon, for instance, even 108 is beautifully connected to the golden ratio. Again, cross cultures, for instance, in Buddhism, the auspicious symbols on the foot of Buddha, 108 just everywhere all the time in regards to this. Here are just some examples. You also find it amongst Jains and Hindus. It's a very important number, and again, just cross time, cross cultures, cross religions. But what I find my particular favourite about 108 is its descriptions of Sun, Earth, Moon, but also Saturn, but not just in speed, but also in time. So, for instance, you multiply the diameter of the Moon times 108, you get the distance from the Moon to the Earth. If you multiply the diameter of the Sun times 108, you get the distance from the Sun to the Earth. You have to include elliptical orbits in these things. Now, even the maximum visible circumference of the Earth would be 10,080 nautical miles by definition. However, the top speed of the Earth around the Sun is 108,000 kilometers per hour. That's interesting because the polar diameter of Saturn is 108,000 kilometers within acceptable margin of error, and if you multiply the diameter of the Sun times 1080, you get the distance from the Sun to Saturn. Now, even 10,800 days for Saturn to orbit the Sun, but I should have put an asterisk there as well, because there is this little leeway in there, and again, if you do a first page Google search, you'll see an answer will pop up. Well, that doesn't usually describe the complexities that go into this, because of elliptical orbits, all these little variations, there's always a little plus or minus that needs to be added to these things, and so it's important to keep them in mind. It's also worth noting that if you multiply the diameter of the Earth times 108, you effectively get the diameter of the Sun. So Sun, Earth, Moon, and Saturn. Oh, and Saturn, also called Chronos, as in chronology or time. A chronometer is another word for a clock. The speed of the Earth per hour is also the diameter of Saturn. So it's interesting. So there are some other little connections to Chronos or Saturn and time, how they also connect through the Earth as well. But what we essentially are seeing is a Sun, Earth, and Moon number, but also Saturn, which is often connected to the black cube, and it's everything is a cube is Saturn. Well, no, the interesting things about Saturn also connect Sun, Earth, and Moon as well. It's a unity number. It's a harmonic number, and that's what I find it so interesting. Now, some of these are arbitrary measures designed by man. That could be argued as well that they're geodetic, Earth-based measure systems. But certain, for instance, the ratio of distance between Earth and Moon at 108, that's built into nature. That the top speed of the Earth corresponds with the polar diameter of Saturn or Chronos, that's also built into nature as well. Now, take that as you will. I don't like to suggest what these meanings are, but at the very least, I think that the ancients had their level of astronomy, geometry, music, and arithmetic was much, much more advanced than what the official historians would give credit to, and it's hard for them to give that up, because then it's a house of cards, and if they admit that, then it's a whole bunch of other things will come sort of crashing down. But why are so many cultures, including in Mesoamerica, Mesopotamia, all these other focus on these very specific numbers? Well, I'll leave that to you. Of course, I have my own conclusions. Now, 216, that's 108 times 2. Now, for instance, the nautical 21,600 nautical miles is the circumference of the Earth. 2,160 miles is the mean diameter. I should have changed that, because, well, it is the equatorial diameter of the Moon. Again, within this tiny margin of error, but to be more specific, I should have said that. Again, it emerges from the Vesica, but we'll also find it in New Jerusalem, for instance. The walls of New Jerusalem New Jerusalem, 144 cubits or 216 feet. And the compass, 360 degrees, is 21,600 minutes. Now, that the compass of 21,600 minutes corresponds to the circumference of the Earth in nautical miles is directly connected. That's by definition. That's where the definition come from. But again, we see how 2,160 miles, the mean diameter of the Moon, also has a lovely correspondence with the cube being 2,160 degrees. But also the cycle of precession, or the great year. Now, that's the 12 signs of the zodiac, most often connected with astrology. Well, there are also very important astronomical connections to them. And so the 12 signs of the zodiac, the vernal equinox is one way of measuring the great year. And of the 12 months of the great year, each month is 2,160 years. Again, you could connect direct connection to New Jerusalem, but also the Ark of Utnapishtim. It's not featured here, but this ancient flood legend, which is basically where we get New Jerusalem from, but also the connection, the story of Noah's flood is like literally lifted off the story of the epic of Gilgamesh. The only difference is that in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Ark is a cube. In the Bible, it's a more traditional long rectangular boat. But again, 216 is a lovely number, like 1 to the third times 2 to the third times 3 to the third, or 6 cubed. 6 times 6 times 6 is 216, and of course it's there in the Vesica. The importance of now it's often said that 108 is a lunar number and 864 is a solar number. I would disagree with that. I would say that each of these numbers show some are about bringing multiple things together, because again, 216 is I think it's not a bad way to think of it, that 108 or 216 as moon numbers and 864 as a sun number, but I don't think it doesn't give it true justice to the greater connections between them all. And again, this is just a snapshot. There's so much more where it's 108, 216, 432. They encompass so much information, and so 216 times 2 is 432. Now the radius, I should again specify, mean radius of the sun is 432,000 miles. I'm just using diameters here, but this long foot, or the Persian scale, some people even put it back to the earliest times of Stonehenge phase 1, but in music tuning, A 432 hertz, again 43,200, we see it emerge in the Vesica. But it's also the the radius of the sun in miles is another way to think about it. And again, it appears in New Jerusalem. You'll also find it in the Ark of Utnapishtim once again. But as an example of 432, again, it's should have included, but all of these numbers appear in ancient weights and measure scales. So whether it's the how many grains in a Roman ounce is 432. The sun, but okay, you also see now the Ark of Utnapishtim, where we see the maximum visible surface area. So the most you can ever see of the cube is ever going to see is 3 sides, each of those being 14,400 square cubits, but altogether that's 432. But also in, say, the Kali Yuga, 43,200 years, the radius of the sun, 43,200 miles. The Vesica, 43,200 seconds, but also the greater cycle of the Yugas of Manu, which is also a flood legend. It's about the last cycle of destruction began with a flood, and Manu, who you could call him Noah, or you could call him Utnapishtim, as in the Ark of Utnapishtim from the Epic of Gilgamesh. The same numbers in these legends, and are all just in this lovely correspondence of supposedly pure coincidence. They all come back to one another, and even these various cultures have the same numbers in their temples, in their legends, in their weights and measures, and 432 is just one example. And so just a reminder, this all emerges from the Vesica Pisces. And following the same pattern again, 432 times 2 is 864. So again, just to point out the mean diameter of the sun. Now there's lots of complexity in measuring, especially the sun. but 86,400 miles diameter is you know, as good as going to get. You're splitting hairs, and then it's a matter of the method used to measure it, because the sun is very dynamic. But of course, again, back to the Vesica, 86,400 seconds being one of the defining angles in there. 86,400 seconds per day, the 24-hour clock, and the New Jerusalem also incorporates 864, a few other aspects in it as well. But just like 108, 864 is a very important number because it's about Sun, Earth, Moon, but also Jupiter and Saturn. So, for instance, 864,000 miles being the diameter of the Sun. Again, there's all these little peccadillos that go into that, and there's always this little plus or minus talking about margins of error. Also margins of definition, how do you define that? There's different techniques of doing it, but 864,000. Now that's nice because the orbital speed of Saturn moves through again, because it's the elliptical orbits, the speed slightly changing, but right in that nice chunky part, basically the average is 864,000 kilometers per day being the orbital speed of Saturn, which is nice because there are 86,400 seconds per day, which defines the Earth, and the orbital speed of the Moon, 86,400 kilometers per day. Just a nice corresponding, which also just so lovely that it connects us to Jupiter as well, at a mean diameter of 86,400 miles. So just like 108, just like these other numbers, what we get is it's not just a Saturn number. Now it's not wrong to say it's a Saturn number. It's not wrong to say 864 is a Sun number, but that's missing. It's actually more in. It brings many things together. Now it's also, just as a reminder, it's also the key number of the pyramid. Now you might have heard that it's 43,200. I would argue differently, because the pyramid is three-dimensional. If you stand at a specific corner, being the northeast corner, what you see is the maximum visible base. That's the rotation speed of the Earth per second. And so again, now if you stand at the corner of a three-dimensional pyramid and multiply the key dimensions by 86,400, as in 86,400 seconds per day, what you describe is the circumference of the Earth and the polar diameter of the Earth. Now the 43,200 model involves a little bit of gymnastics to get you there, and it also only describes half of the Earth, as where this method not only does it connect the Royal Egyptian cubit to the pendulum, the 1 meter pendulum of 86,400 swings per day, literally the seconds per day, but it also joins the meter, the second, and the Royal Egyptian cubit through the pendulum and through this specific number 86,400, which will describe the entire Earth. And its important part to remember is that it's a three-dimensional pyramid. You look at it from the corner, you see the maximum visible base, the maximum height, and from that number all of this emerges. You don't need to take a side view and then a top view and do all the other. Well, like, you know, it's still very lovely. That's where I sort of was introduced to it from. But 86,400 is the number, not 43,200, for these and many other reasons which I've done in other videos. But anyway, 864 times 2, we get 1728. This one's special because it's 12 cubed. Now, at 1728, we also, well, for instance, one example would be the Sun, but also the Ark of Utnapishtim as well as New Jerusalem. 1728 would be a description of their volume. And so, for instance, in the center, we see the Ark of Utnapishtim and New Jerusalem, 1728. But also the Yuga again. So we see the Satya Yuga, 1,728,000 years. And also we see the Sun being connected through the long scale. So Sun and Moon, the cubes of New Jerusalem and the Ark of Utnapishtim. You might even call them the Temple of Man, but that's another longer story. And it's a cubic number as well. And it's interesting that the New Jerusalem and Ark of Utnapishtim 1728 appears as the volume or a cube from there. And that, of course, is by definition because the Ark of Utnapishtim is 128 cubits long, high, and wide. New Jerusalem is 12,000 furlong or stadia, long, high, and wide. And so this is another example of this pattern where we have the same themes, the same legends, these stories passing through, but also encompassing some very important, especially metrology and in regards to astronomy, sun, earth, and moon being key to these. So from 1728 we divide it, we get, sorry, multiply it by 2, we get 3, 4, 5, 6. Now there's a lot of stuff there, but I'm going to leave that out for the moment because I want to stay with the diameters and not deal with radiuses. And the next number, so 3, 4, 5, 6 times 2 is 6,912. And again, now we have a beautiful harmony point once more where we see the sun, the earth, and the moon all being described by this number. And what's especially relevant is that the polar diameter of the earth is 6,912 Egyptian royal miles. 8/7 miles is an Egyptian royal mile. But okay, I've done some other videos on it, but that's important because it's in when you deal with these numbers. So the Earth is special in that way, in that as where it's, for instance, we watch the equator, the sun and the Earth. We reference them in the equator, but the Earth is different where we're standing on top of it. And I think that in a symbolic sense, this is very cleverly done in that the polar diameter is the important one on this particular scale. I'll try to remember to put a link in the description because I describe this in a little bit more detail, or quite a bit more detail, and talk about the specific meaning of having the polar diameter versus the equatorial thinking and how it relates to man stands on Earth and he relates to the sun and the moon horizontally, as where the Earth is a more vertical description. Okay, so but again, this is just an intro. I've got some videos to finish in this series I'm working on, but I'll just to do something else for the moment. I've got some stuff coming in regards to the flood stories, especially the Arkavut Napishtim, the Yugas, and how that connects to the story of Noah and to New Jerusalem specifically. But anyway, again, yeah, just a small example of why these numbers and these measurement systems and why these symbols, sun, earth, and moon, are so important. And I'll put links in the description. And with that, hope you enjoy and have a good one.